So we've talked through the overview of all the views and kind of given you a taste of what the arguments of the views are about. But now we're going to start digging into each view and the arguments that undergird those views. So remember, the four views are classical, evidential, the cumulative case, and presuppositional. And each one of these is a category of apologetics, different ways that you can argue to defend the Christian faith. So today, we're going back into classical, and having gone through the overview, we're now digging into four different arguments, or actually four different arguments that undergird the classical apologetic. So if you remember, classical apologetics has two steps to it. Step one is argue for the existence of God using logic and reason, and then go to evidence to prove that he really is real and that Christ is the Savior. So what we're going to do as far as going through the outline, today we'll do classical apologetics and see how far we get. And once we finish going through the arguments of classical apologetics, we're not going to go to the evidences, which would be step two. Instead, we're just going to go to evidential apologetics, because classical and evidential are kind of paired well. The evidential apologist says you can make the full argument for Christianity just from the evidence. The classical apologist says you need the philosophical reasons and then the evidence. So they're both using evidence, it's just in separate steps. So that's why they talk about it as the one-step or the two-step apologetic. The two-step is classical, argue for the existence of God, then prove it through evidence. Evidential apologetics is one step. Just go straight for the evidence. Don't stop for the philosophical side of the argument. So in the way we go through this, we'll do one lesson on classical, and we'll just look at step one. And then when we go over evidential apologetics, just understand that that is step two of the argument. So hopefully that's clear. I haven't muddied it up too much. But for classical apologetics, we need to be prepared to give a reason for the hope that lies within us, right? So as we work through this, people are going to have questions like, why do you believe in God? Or how do you know God exists? Right? Because you can't taste, touch, smell, feel God himself. God is a spirit. They that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, which is why Jesus taught that no one has ever seen the Father. The Father is invisible and unseen. So to that end, how do you prove something that you can't taste, touch, smell, see? If you can't see God, how do you know he's real? How do you know he is there? As we go through these classical proofs for God's existence and the supporting evidence, the classical proof side is going to be that the arguments for how you can just reason from creation, reason from the existence of the cosmos, how we know that God is real. So to do this, the classical apologetic approach, step one, is to go to the cosmological argument. And this is the first step. It argues for the existence of God from the cosmos, or from the existence of the universe. So the cosmological argument basically says that for anything that exists, you have to have a cause, right? So it's kind of the idea of a cause and effect. The way John Newton would say it is objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and objects at rest tend to stay at rest, unless acted on by an outside force. So what is that outside force that started the chain of events? The way to understand this concern is to really look at the question of ultimate regress. If you go to the argument of, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Definitely the chicken.
The chicken, right. But that shows the question of ultimate regress. A chicken lays an egg, and then that egg hatches and grows a chicken, and then that chicken lays an egg, and that hatches and grows a chicken, and eventually you have to go back to the first chicken. But then where did that chicken come from? Evolutionists say, well, that chicken came from a lizard. creationists say that chicken came from God. And we trace the regress not back to infinity of the Big Bang. We could trace it back to the infinite God. So to do this, we're going to be working with the cosmological argument. So to define it, I say the philosophical attempt to prove God exists by reasoning from the existence of the universe, the existence of the cosmos. So this would be the basic definition of the cosmological argument. But then there's more that goes into it, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But let's see. The argument is commonly used by different faith groups. So especially deistic faiths that do believe in a God are all going to be very favorable to the cosmological argument. This is why the classical apologist says you have to have two steps. You can't just have the first step, because if you just prove God exists, that doesn't prove that Christianity is true. So to prove Christian theism, you need step one, God exists, and step two, Christianity is true. So in step one, we're just proving the existence of God, and Jews and Muslims, the Islamic religion, they also like these arguments because it makes sense and goes to prove that God does exist. However, we're going to be making a different argument in step two to prove that Christianity is the true religion. The cosmological argument asserts that anything must have a cause or a sufficient reason for its existence. So this would really come down to the idea of a contingency. If something has a necessary existence, that is something that's different from something that has a contingent existence. Contingency means that it could fail, or it requires something else or an outside force to exist. But something that is logically necessary, it has to be there. There's no other explanation. There's nothing else that props it up. This is the ultimate cause. The way Anselm of Canterbury popularized it hundreds of years ago was by calling God the prime mover. He is the ultimate beginning of all things. So to get into the basic logic of this argument, you have your various premises and the conclusion. So first, everything that exists has a cause. This is our logical premise one. Premise two, the universe exists. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. It's very logical and it fits together nicely. Now, you talk to an atheist who hates God, who rejects God, he's not going to care a whole lot about your functioning syllogism that makes rational and logical sense, right? He's not going to care about that. Unless you're talking to some kind of an atheist who is a high intellectual. They want to have really good logic and grounds for everything that they're arguing because they really like the philosophical endeavor. And so for someone who is like an atheistic university student or a professor, this kind of an argument is going to have a lot more influence on them than somebody who's just uneducated, living in a trailer, and they don't want to learn about anything, right? They don't want the philosophical arguments. Maybe they're mad at God. They're shutting him out. And so they're going to really not care about this argument. But for people that you want it to be most effective for, you can pull this out for the more intellectual types. The good way to illustrate how this cosmological argument works, looking at it with God as the prime mover, you could look at it as God being the hand that tips the first domino. You set up a row of dominoes, and you can knock them over and cause an effect. One knocks the next down, the next down, the next. And as they all go down, you can go back and look at where the tipping all started. Well, the first domino that fell had to be moved by something, and that would be the hand of the prime mover, the first cause. One of the ways to work this out, and this has recently been repopularized by William Lane Craig. So when I say recently, this is like in the last 40 years. But in the world of philosophy, that's fairly new, fairly recent. Originally, the cosmological argument was developed by a Muslim. He was a Muslim apologist arguing for Allah being the true God. And for him, he realized that before you could prove Allah is the true God, you had to prove that God exists. So he makes this very general argument that Christians have been able to go, oh, hey, that makes a lot of logical sense. Let's take their argument, but then adapt it to actually fit the truth. And so that's where William Lane Craig takes this Kalam cosmological argument and uses it for people today. So, to define the KCA, or the cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument is a philosophical argument for the existence of God that has its roots in Islamic philosophy and has been adopted by various theologians and philosophers. The KCA is classified as a posteriori argument, an a posteriori argument. So if you have your pen, you should extend that line to include the A. That's not a typo. It's a posteriori. I just didn't do the line right on my word processor. Huh?
She's being a grammarian.
I appreciate grammatics. It should be italics, right? Yes. But it's a posteriori argument, meaning that it starts from observations about the cosmos and deduces the existence of the creator. So, yes. So, for this argument, we're looking at what we can see and then looking for the cause of it all. So it's kind of a inductive argument. Well, I see all this evidence around me. What could be the one thing that brought this all about? Now, the way that the Kalam cosmological argument plays out is with their syllogism, looking at origins. So, premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Would you disagree with either one of those premises? So, the universe had to have a cause. And what would that cause be? Well, for the person using the cosmological argument, it has to be something outside of creation. Everything in the world around us has a level of contingency to it, right? It has to have something outside of itself to exist. We have to have somebody who designs and makes an iPhone for an iPhone to exist. That is a contingent object. But God is the only thing that is not truly contingent. He is self-sufficient. So the strengths of this argument, it incorporates both the philosophical reasoning and scientific cosmology, and they can then fit together. And even critics that would support the Big Bang Theory, they still posit a universe that has a starting point. So they need to have a sufficient cause behind such a miracle. If you want to say that the Big Bang is the way everything happened, you have to admit that the Big Bang is a miracle. And where did that miracle come from? It had to have come from a cause. And that cause, we're going to continue this argument and come at it from other ways, but that cause would have to be whatever God is. Now you can get into the traits that God would have, but at least a God has to exist, right? Without someone causing the Big Bang, we have no way for that to have started itself. So we have a problem of contingency even with the Big Bang. Does that make sense? So then we can move on to the next part of the argument, or the next form of the cosmological argument, and this is going to be the teleological argument. This is essentially going to be the argument from design. This argument has its roots in classical Greece and was popularized in the 18th and 19th centuries. So it's actually only really come into vogue or popularity since the scientific revolution. But the teleological argument, it's one that's easy to slip up on when you're trying to say that. The teleological argument was popularized through William Paley's divine watchmaker analogy, which is probably the most famous way that we see this argument being made. So essentially, if you read Paley, the narrative goes that there's this fella walking around out in the middle of a great plain, and there's nothing out there. It's just a wide open expanse. And as he's walking, he comes upon a watch in the dirt. And he picks up the watch and he dusts the dirt and cleans the mud off, and the watch is still functioning. And he looks at this incredible thing that he found in the field, and he thinks, wow, this is a really neat piece of machinery. It has technical knowledge that would have gone into making this. The person who made this must have been an incredible designer. Something that looks like it's been designed has to have had someone to design it. Design implies a designer. Plato and Aristotle reasoned this way, and they really got into this concept of infinite regress, where everything has to have come from somewhere. Back in Aristotle's day, it was really popular to think of the world as being made up of the 4 different elements. So wind, fire, water, and earth. And those were like the things that made up everything around us. But they started to reason, well, what if I can start a fire, where did that material for the fire came from? Oh, well, it came from plants. Where did that plant come from? Oh, it came from the dirt. Well, if everything else had a cause, where did that dirt come from? And they didn't have an answer for that. And so it fell back into this question of infinite regress. And the way this worked out in their religion, their philosophy, is the idea that Atlas is the Greek god who's holding up the world. Well, what's holding up the god Atlas? What's below him? We don't know. Religious philosophy has the same problem. They say that the earth is on top of an elephant, which is being held up by a giraffe, which is being held up by a hippopotamus, which is being held up by a turtle. And the perceptive young Indian student goes up to his teacher and says, well, teacher, after the turtle, then what's next? And the Indian philosopher says, well, after the turtle, it's just turtles all the way down. Because you get to a point where the question becomes nonsensical.
What's at the bottom?
Turtles. All the way.
Turtles all the way down?
All the way down.
What's underneath all the turtles all the way down?
And now you understand the problem of infinite regress. Eventually, as you go back and you look at the cause and effect and the cause and effect, and you trace the causes all the way back to the first cause, you can't go backwards forever. Mormonism has the same problem. They fall into this error of infinite regress because they say that God, the Father is Kolob, and he lived just like we live, and he lived on his own planet, and there was a God before him that he was answerable to, and he lived a perfect life, and so he attained godhood and was given his own planet to inhabit. And so the logical assumption is that the god Kolob, once worshipped, had a god that he once worshipped before him, and in infinite regress, gods have been creating other gods and giving them worlds to populate. And that just goes back into infinite regress. So they never, the Mormon philosophy never comes to a point where there is actually a prime mover. There is no single origin of all things. It just keeps going back into eternity. Christianity is the only one that really has an answer for where time came from and the beginning of all things. And that is in the unmoved mover, or the prime mover. He is the first cause that imparts motion without being moved itself, thus establishing the origin of all motion in the universe. Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas formalized this system in the 13th century, and he described it as the 5 ways, and he especially looked at things like motion, causation, and contingency to say, well, if you look, everything has to have a cause before it except for God. God is not contingent upon anything. He is self-sufficient. This also appears in other theistic religions like Judaism and Islam, but they all have to work through it in their own ways. The teleological argument posits that complexity and intricate design of the universe implies an intelligent designer, which is often identified as God. It differs from the Kalam cosmological argument by emphasizing the purpose of the universe rather than its origin. So when you're looking at the teleological argument, yes, there's this issue of infinite regress, but that's not what they're emphasizing. They're digging down into, well, look at how everything in creation has a purpose. Everything that you see in the world, there is some purpose and ultimate reason for why that exists. We have the sun to give us heat. We have the moon to give us light at night and give us tidal currents. We have earth below us to grow plants and to protect us from the mantle of the earth, or from the heat from the core of the earth. The soil also provides somewhere for plants to grow and provides nutrition to plants, and on we can go. Everything, even the most basic things around us, all has a purpose. Well, if it has a purpose, that must have been put there intentionally. And teleology is looking at what would be the cause of all of this design and purpose in the world around us. And if it's so complex, and if it's so carefully tuned for the existence of life, then it must have been put there by a designer. So the premises go like this. Here's the basic logic of the argument. Whatever is complex, wherever complex, purposeful design exists, there must be an intelligent designer. The universe shows complex, purposeful design at every level, from subatomic to biological, and even on the level of the cosmos. Everything has a complex and purposeful design. Therefore, the universe requires an intelligent designer greater than the design itself. So this is going back to that row of dominoes. Who started it all? And in fact, the question is not just who tipped the first domino, but who put all the dominoes out in the first place. So the Kalam cosmological argument is the question about who tips the dominoes. The teleological argument is who lined all the dominoes up with the design of creating this incredible chain reaction. Well, it had to be put there by a designer. So there are some examples that we can look at for this. So in our examples of design, you can look at the fine-tuning of planetary orbits. The Earth is very uniquely designed to provide protection and life or protection and a climate for life to exist. But then even the other planets all have an effect on the orbit of the Earth, so that they help to keep the Earth stable. They protect the Earth from the different comets and asteroid clouds that are out in space beyond our small solar system. And in a lot of these ways, we see a very purposeful design. And even the distance that the Earth is from the sun. If we were any closer, the Earth would become tidally locked with the sun, and the same side of the Earth would always face the sun, and the opposite side of the Earth would always face space. One side would boil and burn up, and the other side would freeze, and there would be no life. Not even on the very edges around the juncture between the hot side and the cold side, even where it would be a livable temperature, because of the burning and freezing on either side, you wouldn't even have a climate that would support life in the middle. So just the simple distance from the sun is required to be exactly what it is, or else there would cease to be life on Earth. Which is why we talk about the Earth sitting in this Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's in exactly the right place in orbit, which is just right. Another way to make this argument for the example of design is through DNA evidence. So when you look at the DNA in the information center of every cell, you can look at DNA and see an incredible amount of information coded. DNA contains highly complex, specified information. These are essentially the instructions for building proteins and organisms. Well, if you're going to look at a complex code, this code is actually far more complex than any computer code we have in existence today. No computer scientist is going to go and look at computer code and say, wow, this is incredibly complex. They're following the rules of language. I bet this just happened by accident. Someone put a monkey in front of a keyboard and he banged out all this code, and now we can play incredible video games that have lifelike graphics and these really cool game mechanics that clearly have a design. That all came from monkeys at a keyboard. That would be impossible. No computer science would believe that because
Or you'd say that's one smart monkey.
would have to be one smart monkey, which would be a designer. It's not pure randomness.
Both ways.
So in every known case, complex specified information arises from an intelligence. If you have the appearance of intelligence, then you have to infer that there is a designer. So if every known case shows that complex specified information must arise from intelligence, therefore the information in DNA points to an intelligent designer. Well, the evolutionist has his explanations for how that could happen. So the naturalist would say mutation and natural selection could produce this kind of complexity. So natural selection kills off all of the iterations that don't work. So then all you're left with is the one that does work. The problem with the naturalist explanation through natural selection is that the process of natural selection is selecting for a specific set of information that already exists. Natural selection has no mechanism to create new information. Right? So whenever you have microevolution in the world today, you see a finch going from having a pointy beak to a curved beak. You see a butterfly going from having lots of colors to being only black and white. In each of those mutations, you are seeing a loss of information. There's no mechanism, there's no evidence that it has ever happened where one species has added information to its DNA code and become another species. And even when scientists today are trying to work with the mRNA vaccines, the mRNA is a kind of DNA editing code that they're basically trying to reprogram the software of the cell. And so far, they haven't been able to do it with all of the wisdom and knowledge of our scientists today. They still don't have the ability to edit the DNA code. And when they edit the code, they're trying to work with already existing information. They're not creating any new information, even as they're doing this DNA editing technology. That's why it's called editing and not DNA creation, right? So there is no naturalistic explanation for where new code comes from. So when they say, well, you have the beginning of the Earth, and it's this really hot environment with the steaming gases and a thick atmosphere, and you end up with this primordial ooze with all the right amino acids floating around in the water. Well, to get the amino acids to form a simple protein is impossible on its level of complexity. In a designed environment, they have been able to use some kind of a ooze to create a protein, but then to get those proteins to chain together and form complex strings of information in a DNA strand is completely impossible. You have to have a designer to come and put all the proteins together into a string of DNA. So essentially, the evolutionists say, well, there's no naturalist explanation for it, so there must be some unknown explanations that we don't understand yet. So what are they doing? They're admitting that they don't have a logical explanation for where DNA came from, so they have to punt to mystery. They say, well, I don't know the answer, so it's just a mystery, but we'll find it someday. Saying, I don't know, but we'll find it, that is a faith claim. They have blind faith in this philosophy that Darwin set up, and they're saying, well, Darwin seems to have been right from what I've seen in the past, so I'm just going to believe that Darwin will be right in the future. But the truth is that they have no actual scientific way to prove DNA.
He's dead already.
What's that?
He's already dead. He can't be right in the future.
Well, but his philosophy lives on.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So, when we respond to the naturalists who appeal to unknown mechanisms, we can say that we're going to infer design from the best current evidence, and unknown mechanisms cannot replace the explanatory power of intelligent causation. right? Does that make sense? I can explain it further. Inferring design from the best known current evidence. So what do we actually know now? We have the argument that it came from an unknown mechanism or from a creator who we believe has revealed himself. Unknown mechanisms can't be the cause from a scientific perspective. So to have a sound scientific argument, we can't just say, well, it's a mystery. We have to have some cause. And so for our scientific paradigm, the most logical, the best answer for us is to say that falling back onto an intelligent cause would be the best way to explain the existence of design.
Have you ever seen, I don't know if the meaning or what, but I have seen like little videos on whatever, where the guy's sitting there and he says, look, we created an animated, I don't know, something out of bird.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, see, Lord, we did it too. And he's like, no, get your own bird.
Exactly.
Get your own bird.
Get your own bird. You didn't do what I did.
Plagiarism.
Right. Even as scientists try to create the perfect ooze and then hit it with electricity and cause protein to form from amino acids. Well, the scientists purposely designed a fluid that's filled with amino acids for the purpose of creating a protein. Where did they get their amino acids from? They're borrowing from God. And God is the one who created ex nihilo, or out of nothing.
I'm calling plagiarism. Also, you guys are copying me, and just like you have AI copy other people.
We are the official intelligence, but we're not the origin of intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And in some respects, it's kind of an ironic process because imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yes. So even in their attempts to disprove God, there is a sense in which these atheist scientists are still bringing glory to his name. Yeah. Ironically. So, if we're going to look at objections to the teleological argument, we ask, could chance have produced the appearance of design? So just because something is designed doesn't mean it had to have happened. You can illustrate this with books. People like to take books and say, oh, well, if you pull out every 200th letter, it spells death to America. Well, the odds that you could find some kind of a mathematical pattern and pull the letters together and create some semblance of information.
It just sounds like a conspiracy theory.
It's exactly how they create conspiracy theories. They look at patterns, which the human brain is really good at identifying patterns. They look at patterns and they say, well, that has an appearance of design to it, but we know that it's really just pure chance. Like, they didn't do all this on purpose. So the question would be, could all of this have been an appearance of design, like pulling random letters out of a book and saying, oh, wow, look, it spells this secret code? Well, to respond to that question, you would say no. The odds of random chance producing a fine-tuned constant is astronomically impossible. So everything we see in the world around us, all of it having a design, not being able to pick and choose our information, or cherry picking our data. If you just look at everything around us, it all has this appearance of design to it. This can be illustrated by the obvious technical design behind a simple textbook. To say, well, in the textbook, if you take every 500 letters and the 501st letter every time you pull it together and it says, I like gravy, well, being able to make a simple sentence, that could be chance. But the entire textbook, using good grammar and properly using italics when you're supposed to, and having underlines that are consistent underneath a full term, that kind of design is actually a really good argument for the existence of an author who wrote the book. And even if you want to go further, making perfectly rectangular pages that are cut out and glued together or sewn together and placed within a hard cardboard binding, well, look at the book itself, there's so much design and purpose that went into it. You can cherry pick data and say, well, maybe you could come up with random chance and have some semblance of information there. But when you take a step back from the cherry picked data and just look at the whole, it all has this very clear, obvious design to it that had to have been done by a purposeful designer. The next objection is that asking, could natural laws produce the appearance of design? So, well, maybe it's not random chance that made it all happen. What if it's natural law? So this is where the evolutionist says, well, it is the mechanism of survival of the fittest. All of the stupid organisms that didn't work out, well, they died off. All of the Homo sapiens that didn't evolve the esophagus correctly or didn't evolve properly to have sexual reproduction or didn't properly evolve their eyesight to be able to see snakes and lions, well, all the non-functioning organisms died off, which is why the functioning organisms consist to this day. And the functioning organisms, of course, they look like they're designed because they have been selected for through the natural laws, through natural processes. The problem with this theory is that laws themselves imply a lawgiver. To truly have natural law, you have to have someone who designed the law. So this objection simply points back to the original argument of intelligent design.
And we all know the natural selection law can't be true because people, because the evolutionists are still here and they're unable to see God. So
right. Well, and it goes back to the intelligent design argument because you have to have someone who designed and wrote the laws. Just saying, well, it is because the way it is, that's a faith argument, and they end up in this line of ultimate regress. So it falls apart on a logical level. So to boil it all down, this really comes down to the argument that design points to a designer. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. You can have the whole syllogism, but when it comes down to the teleological argument, if you're in a conversation with somebody, you just point to it and say, look, design has to have a designer. Something that has a purpose, your fingers function together to be able to use tools. Well, somebody must have designed your hand to be able to function with tools. That can't just happen on accident. The eye just can't magically come into existence on its own. And the reason why these things can't just pop into existence is because if they're evolving slowly over time, that slow evolutionary process has to deal with the question of irreducible complexity. If you take out one part, the whole thing falls to pieces. Think about the problem we have with chromosomes. If someone is born with too many or too few chromosomes, they lose the ability to reproduce. They lose the ability to be able to do higher level thinking, function on a higher level. And so because of those things, if that's what we were trusting chance to do, is to create the right chromosomes to propagate the species, well, eventually the species would die off. But because we have proper XY chromosomes that are propagated through a appearance of chance, with the X and the Y interacting in the sexual reproduction process, that is what has made it possible for us to continue to have men and women who grow up to adulthood and are able to use their powers of logic to create a society where they can protect each other from the elements and from bad actors and from the predators of the world, and form a society where they can reproduce. All of that had to have come from somewhere. And if you take out one part of the whole chain, you add an extra chromosome, the entire thing falls apart. You don't have the society, you don't have the protection, you don't have the higher level thinking of adult humans, and you lose the reproduction, the ability to reproduce. And bam, no more species. Extinction. And that should have happened at every juncture between species on the evolutionary family tree. There is no mechanism for one species to go to another species. There's no mechanism for a single-celled organism to go to a multi-celled organism. It just doesn't work that way. And if you try to do something like that, well, the irreducible complexity of a single cell, you remove the mitochondria, and suddenly all that wonderful information that just happened on accident in the DNA cannot exist because there's no mitochondria to power the DNA. You lose the powerhouse of the cell, you have no energy, and suddenly you have no life anywhere in the entire world. So in every aspect of creation, we have irreducible complexity everywhere around us, which shows with that kind of design, you have to have a designer. So that's as far as we're going to make it today. But as we move forward, we'll get into Leibniz, we'll do the ontological argument, and then we'll wrap it up. So hopefully we can get through all of that next week, and it'll all be good and fun. And then we can get into a lot more Bible with the evidential apologetics. So I'm looking forward to that. But if you have to skip a Sunday, you can skip next Sunday because we're not talking a lot of Bible. Now there you go. That works out.
The one thing I always like natural selection, I have a problem with the existence of compassion. Because we have compassion, I never could figure out natural selection is my compassion.
It really doesn't. There are evolutionary philosophers that try to come up with natural.
They try, but it really does not explain why they're compassionate, or even the balancing of the design in a compassionate way.
Right.
Something that doesn't, that would go this direction, God balances it compassionately.
Well, they'll try to say that it went from, like, as the human species developed, it became dominant because of its ability to form societies. And for the function of a society, you have to have the, what do they call it? The universal imperative is the imperative to reproduce. Everything has to reproduce, and so that's, what they say is behind sexual drive. But for the societal aspect, I'm trying to remember the term.
But it argues, natural selection argues against compassion.
But compassion, whatever the mechanism is that they say is behind compassion, says that for the propagation of the species and not just the individual, it prioritizes things like compassion and justice, which you wouldn't have through simple natural selection. So they're theorizing that there would be another mechanism in place to cause all that, which I understand where they're coming from. But where does right? Yeah, and what about compassion? Yeah. So it is an attempt. An attempt is made, but I don't know that it's a very sound logical argument. It is valid, but it's not sound.